Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope I can give you all a very big hug, because it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can receive a hug from a distance, that's for sure. So I'm sending you lots and lots of hugs, and I hope you're feeling on top form. I'm feeling great, thank you very much. And let's get started with part 2 of our story. If you haven't heard part 1 of the story, don't forget to click on the description. So let's continue with part 2 of our story. Before long, I was finally driving down my drive, parking my Explorer outside my private veterinary practice, where I'd often rehabilitate wild animals that people brought to me. The only patients I had at the moment were 2 magpies, who were recovering in their cages from wing injuries, and they were doing superbly, and were very playful. I even had dogs and cat toys, some sparkling things in their large cage that they were playing with inquisitively. I had grown fond of them. I often let them hop around in the backyard. They had grown to trust me, and I was almost sorrowful that sooner or later I'd be returning them to the wild. I opened the back door of my truck. The cute but bashful Bigfoot allowed me to carry her in my arms. She was too sick to protest, and as light as your average toddler, but was well enough to get grievously upset and offended when I promptly disregarded the smelly pelt, tossing it with a measure of disgust in the middle of my driveway. I had clandestinely decided I would secretly dispose of it in the morning, as that ghastly thing had soaked up a lot of ammonia and ponged to high heaven for some reason, and it was not coming anywhere near my surgery. She indicated that she wanted the bear pelt, and seemed attached to it like a kid might be attached to her teddy bear. I could tell the little Bigfoot was frightened and rather intimidated to be in a strange place, which was perfectly understandable in the circumstances. I assured her with soothing words that everything would be fine, and that with swift treatment and intravenous fluids and antibiotics, she'd be as right as rain. The poor thing was away from its mother. I can't imagine what it was feeling. It was only 2 foot tall. I placed the Bigfoot on a bed and gave her a blanket which she seemed to like. The 2 magpies at the cage at the end of the room were watching her with a curious interest. I don't think she even noticed them. Even in a grip of a high fever, the Bigfoot marvelled how soft the blanket I had given her was, and appeared to be captivated by its green colour. I was heartily relieved that I'd found a perfect replacement for the smelly pelt. I attached the Bigfoot to an intravenous drip and began to treat her with antibiotics. I was able to lance the Bigfoot's foot successfully, removing a large splinter. I also removed a huge mound of pus and blood from her foot. She was heartily relieved by the comfort it brought her. The other side of her foot was badly infected. I couldn't touch it without her shrieking in pain. I attended to her foot, adopting all the protocols needed for her condition. I gave her some sedatives and allowed her to sleep, and then I returned to the house, feeling more than a little frazzled. This had been quite some night, one I would be unlikely to ever forget in a hurry. I didn't have the heart or the energy to confess to my wife that I had been sleepwalking that night. I was hopeful she was still fast asleep, so she wouldn't ask me any awkward questions. How could I explain to her that I had taken a drive in my sleep and had no memory of the event? As I entered my house very discreetly, I closed the door carefully behind me, getting the shock of my life when I was met by my cantankerous wife, who looked belligerently angry. I thought she was literally going to blow the roof of the house off. This was all I needed right now, an interrogation by the special forces. She studied me through suspicious narrowing eyes. "You've got some explaining to do, George. Where the hell have you been? I woke up at about 2:30 in the morning and discovered not only were you not in your bed next to me, but your car was missing from the garage. I mean, what am I supposed to think when you go waltzing off in the middle of the night like this with no explanation whatsoever? Now, don't you dare try and pull a farce on me and say it was an emergency call-out. I've been checking your cell phone, and you've got no emergency call-outs. I want to know what the hell you think you were doing. I went back to bed and woke up to see your truck parked outside the surgery. What were you doing in there with the lights on?" she asked me, with her brows raised. I was not about to tell my wife about my sleepwalking or the Bigfoot I'd encountered. I believe the little Bigfoot deserved to be treated privately, without any interference, and at the best of times my wife could be a busybody, but she barely ever crossed the threshold of my private surgery, thank goodness. "I'm listening, George. This better be good, or I'm tossing you in the doghouse," she said, giving me a huge frown, with hands on her hips. She looked quite sweet, with a pugnacious expression on her face, and her tousled hair hanging in indignant buoyant curls on her shoulders. On sensing my amusement, my wife looked even more frustrated. "What do you mean by going off in the middle of the night like that? I never even heard you leave, and usually you're so noisy. What is going on, George? And for the record, this is not funny, not remotely. I can see you're amused, but I'm not laughing. What am I supposed to do when I wake up to find your side of the bed ice cold? It freaked me the hell out. At the very least, you could have had the courtesy to tell me where you were going." "If you must know, I was feeling restless. I got up in the middle of the night and went for a drive. You were sound asleep, sleeping like a baby. I didn't have the heart to wake you up. You looked so peaceful," I lied. "It's not like you to be so thoughtful, George," said my wife scathingly. "Even when you go trooping downstairs for a glass of milk in the middle of the night, it's like a tornado has blown into the house, with your feet stomping across the floorboards like a great big bull elephant. And now you're actually claiming to be worried about waking me. You do surprise me. You're not usually like this. If you consider yourself considerate, you could have actually woken me up, or left me a note to tell me where you were going." My wife physically scowled. She did not look best pleased with me, and frankly I couldn't blame her. If she pulled a similar stunt on me, I would be more than a little affronted. I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly. "I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. I should have left you a note. I guess I was not thinking." "You're damn right, George. You weren't thinking. For once we agree on something. I've been worried sick about you. You went for a drive in the middle of the night. Are you completely insane? Who does that?" The annoyance on my wife's face grew into concern, as the lines in between her brows puckered up into a puzzled look. "You're not nursing a secret, are you, George?" she asked me questioningly. "Oh, my God! You are, aren't you, George?" she said, cupping her mouth. "You're hiding something very significant from me, aren't you? What is all this about? You need to tell me." "No, I'm not," I said defensively, wondering how my wife could have guessed. I thought about the little Bigfoot tucked away in the surgery fast asleep. I could not tell my wife about her. If I did share my secret with her, the next thing is that the whole of Kentucky would know about the poor little critter, and congregations of inquisitive people would be gathering outside my surgery to take a look at the little creature that deserved her privacy and respect. Our home would become like the travelling circus in the 1800s, where you'd pay big money to observe unusual oddities, like a woman with 4 legs, or 2 conjoined twins. The next thing, the news would be splashed over the local papers. "Vet finds baby Bigfoot in the back of his truck, which he is treating for sepsis." I needed that kind of drama in my life like a hole in the head. I hated any kind of attention on me, and reporters wanting to write a sensational story was something that made me physically shudder. The little Bigfoot deserved her privacy. These creatures were clearly elusive and quiet by nature, which had helped them survive very successfully for centuries, I suspect. And I was not going to mess that up for this little Bigfoot. Don't get me wrong. While I loved my wife dearly, she had a mouth on her that could wander rather too freely for her own good, and she could get so carried away. My wife was incapable of keeping a secret. I remember once she told everyone that she was hosting a surprise birthday party for me 2 weeks before the event, and I learnt all about it on the day she began clandestinely organising the surprise for me. I had to stand in front of my mirror when I was shaving, practising how I was going to react, trying to look surprised when I entered my house on the day of my party, and all my friends emerged from behind the sofas to say boo, and to wish me happy birthday, when I knew all about it. "No, of course not," I said, trying to avoid eye contact with my wife. "Why would you say that?" "Oh, my God! You're sick, aren't you, George? That's what this is about. That's why you're behaving so furtively. You don't want to worry me. What is it you've got? Oh, my word! You haven't got prostate cancer, have you?"
Isla's husband's got prostate cancer, you know. But it is treatable. He's going to make a full recovery. He's been declared cancer-free. Whatever it is you're not telling me, George, we can get through this together. We're a team. I cannot bear to think of you taking long, lonely trips in the middle of the night in your car, worrying about your condition, and too afraid to tell me about it. As I keep saying, George, we'll do this together. We're a team. This is what marriage is all about. Have you forgotten our vows? In sickness and health, till death us do part.
I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't be so dramatic. There is nothing at all wrong with me, I assured her. Can't a man take a drive in a night, just for a little space?
What? You think I'm crowding you? Is that what this is about? Asked my wife.
Of course not, darling. I just fancied a drive in the middle of the night. That's all, I lied.
And you promise me you're not sick? She asked me gingerly, studying me curiously. Because if I find you are, George, I won't forgive you for keeping such a monumental secret from me. Do you understand? We do things together.
But of course I understand. I wouldn't have it any other way. I assure you, sweetheart, I am not sick.
My wife seemed reasonably satisfied that I wasn't duplicitously hiding anything from her. But for the next few days she began watching me like a hawk, even when I was shaving in the bathroom. I could not escape the feeling of her eyes burning into the back of my neck. Worse still, I noticed that she had rifled through my drawers and cupboards, as if trying to assure herself that I was not suffering from a deadly disease that I was keeping secret from her. She was looking for a doctor's report, announcing that I only had 6 months left to live. My wife was quite the drama queen. I regret to say she'd never believe I'd snuck out in the middle of the night to meet a lover, or that I was cheating on her in any way. Indeed, if anyone would suggest such a preposterous, ludicrous idea, she'd probably laugh at them, with the absurdity of such a suggestion.
What? George having an affair? Never! No, George would never have an affair. Are you kidding me? I mean, who would actually have him?
I'm not that bad looking, I told her once.
Why is it so crazy to assume I could never have an affair? You may be handsome, George, but my God, getting anything out of you is like extracting blood out of a stone. Women like men who have a silver tongue on them and can charm them. But no, you're very quiet. You're very withdrawn, aren't you, George?
But I'm charming, I insisted.
You're reticent, my sweetheart. You haven't got the seductive tongue, have you? You're a very contained person. Most people are very unaware of what a treasure you are, because you keep yourself tightly buttoned up, don't you? It's like having a beautiful ring tucked away in a jewellery box, which I'm the only one that gets to see. I'm a very lucky woman. I was the one fortunate to discover that there was so much more to you than actually meets the eye. When we first dated, I remember thinking you were such a dreadful bore. I was planning to break up with you, you know, but I didn't have the heart to hurt your feelings. But the more time I spent with you, I realized, to my astonishment, I actually like this man a hell of a lot. Most women would not be as long-suffering as I am, you see. Most women would think you're a tad boring, and no one wants to hang out with someone who's dreadfully dull. And that's what most people assume you are, George.
Lovely, I thought. I wouldn't describe myself as boring, but my wife clearly thought I was. So the less said about that, the better. Thankfully, the little Bigfoot in my charge did not find me boring at all. Her cute little brown eyes would watch me curiously as I attended to her every need. She had made friends with the magpies, and I would find all 3 of them playing together on the floor when I opened the surgery, as the female Bigfoot had let them out of their bird cage. The 2 magpies were perching on her shoulders and looked incredibly contented, playing around with their toys I'd got them, and trotting across the floor with the toys in their beaks. I was amazed that the little Bigfoot was actually mimicking the magpie's squawks, and I think those birds assumed the Bigfoot was also a magpie. The little Bigfoot even copied my mannerisms when I attended to her, and I have to say her foot was healing fast. She had recovered from the fever, and the blue tissue on her foot was becoming pink and healthy.
The Bigfoot child certainly had a stronger constitution than most humans, and that did not surprise me in the least. When I attended to her foot, her hands would run through my hair, touch my skin, frolic with my earlobes, and she'd make a cute chuckling sound, as if she was laughing. She put some silver tinsel in my hair, and began to whoop with delight, circling around me as if she was playing round and round the mulberry bush. She told me her name was Zalia, but beyond that I couldn't understand a word she was saying because she spoke so fast. I had been feeding the Bigfoot human food, and she seemed to be particularly partial to apple pie. She enjoyed sausages and mash, and plenty of fruit salad. The treatment protocol which I'd used on her worked remarkably well, and I had in mind that the following evening I would drop the Bigfoot where I'd found her, although it might be tricky to find the exact location. But I was sure the little Bigfoot would have a sense of where I should go, and would lightly point out where I needed to drop her off. I was surprised what a girly girl Zalia was, with her feminine gestures and very gentle mannerisms. She was so endearing. If the truth be told, she was like any other regular toddler, and I almost forgot she was a Bigfoot. It was surprising she didn't stink, given that she had come wrapped in a manky pelt. Needless to say, on the morning that I'd hidden the Bigfoot away in my surgery, from the prying eyes of my astute wife, she was the one to discover the pelt lying in the middle of the driveway. My wife thought that a woman in the church that she had fallen out with had purposely dropped the nasty thing in the middle of our driveway, and she was very indignant about it. I'm not sure all the details of the dispute my wife was having with this woman, and frankly I didn't want to know, although it was likely the whole church had been informed of the shenanigans between my wife and Flora Whittle. From what I'd learnt, Flora had said something offensive about my wife's carrot cake, describing it as dry and tasteless, and my wife had overheard her snide remarks and reacted very adversely to her criticism. The two of them had since become mortal enemies, prickly and very angry, lashing out at each other at any opportunity. So there was no love lost between the two women, who seemed to wind each other up by merely looking at each other. "I don't bloody believe it," said my wife. "The nerve of the woman! How can she stoop this low? Even I wouldn't do something like that. She's only gone and flung a pelt in the middle of our driveway, just to get her revenge on me, because I told her that her carrot cake was so vile it had made me vomit. What a bitch! This thing, wherever she got it, it stinks to high heaven, and I'm going to get her back for this. What a cow that woman is!" "Hold on a moment," I said to my wife. "You don't know where the bear pelt came from. You can't just jump to conclusions like this." "Have you smelt the bloody thing?" said my wife. "It reeks. No one would ever throw a pelt into our driveway, except Flora Whittle. She never liked me one bit. She told me the other day she was going to make me pay for being so rude about her carrot cake. She's not going to get away with this," said my wife, swaggering furiously. I watched with horror as my wife removed the pelt from the driveway with gloves and stuffed it in a plastic taupe that she put in the trunk of her car. I groaned, but I couldn't tell her the truth about that pelt. "Where are you going?" I asked her. "To make a fragrant delivery to Flora Whittle," said my wife with a smug sense of satisfaction. "I don't think that's a good idea, love. I think you've got this dreadfully wrong," I'd said. I hastened to say witnesses saw my wife unloading a manky pelt on Flora Whittle's driveway. Flora Whittle had come thundering out of her house, looking absolutely livid, asking my wife what the hell she was doing. "I'm returning your fragrant delivery," said my wife, pointing an accusatory finger at Flora. "Don't think I don't know what you've been doing behind my back, Flora. I'm not a complete idiot. And for the record, I think you should consider taking your pelt to the cleaners because it stinks. But no cleaner is going to take that thing in." Flora Whittle was enraged, and I believe my wife and Flora began to pull each other's hair, like two belligerent teenagers, while a neighbour of Flora's tore them apart. "Ladies, calm down. There's no reason for two mature adults to be behaving like this." Of course she denied that she had thrown a bear pelt into our driveway, but my wife told me she knew differently, and that Flora Whittle had done this. And so it would seem the love and hate relationship between Flora and my wife persisted. One night when the Bigfoot was still in my charge, I woke up with a firm voice in my head that was not my own, telling me to take the Bigfoot to the place where I initially found her, wherever that was. I glanced down at my wife in bed. As usual, she had managed to steal a few of my sheets, and appeared to be enfolded in them, with one arm outstretched. She appeared to be in such a deep sleep, more so than usual, and a soft snore was emanating from her parted lips. I even called out her name, but she failed to respond. She really was dead to the world. I sat up with a jolt, wondering if I really had heard the strange voice in my head. And then I heard it again. The instructions were clear, precise, and earnest. I knew the inner voice did not come from my own head. It was a little like hearing the voice of God in your mind. I knew I had to listen to this voice, and so I unhesitantly climbed out of bed and scrambled over to my cupboard, where I pulled out some jeans, a pair of sneakers, and a couple of warm sweaters. We always have a night light on in our bedroom, and on the landing, as there is nothing worse than stumbling around in the darkness, trying to navigate your way around the house. I found the night light helped me to be a lot less clumsy on my feet, but try as I might to be quiet, I was not doing a good job. I kept expecting my wife to wake up and give me the third degree of what I was doing. At one point my car keys went crashing onto the ground. I stood very still, my heart pounding in my chest, as I waited for my wife to wake up, but she was dead to the world. She had heard nothing. This was a first, I thought, as I tried to discreetly slip down the staircase, out of the kitchen door towards the garage. I was making quite a noise, opening garage doors, backing my car out of the open doors. I glanced up at our bedroom window, but no light came on. I sighed with relief and scurried over to the surgery. When I opened the surgery door, the cute little Bigfoot was waiting for me. She had a green blanket swaddled over her body. She knew I was taking her back to the place I'd found her, when I discovered her lying in the back seat of my car. How could she even know my intentions? Had the strange voice that had instructed me to take her to the place where I discovered her spoken to her too? It would seem so. The magpies were making quite a commotion as she left, clearly upset to see her go. But the Bigfoot turned around and looked at them, and they immediately seemed to calm down. Without a word she followed me, on her little feet to the car, and climbed into the front seat next to me. She began to point out the directions. It was like she knew exactly where I was taking her. For one so young, I was completely confounded. If I put a 2-year-old in my car and asked him or her to point out the way to the local town, they would have no sense of direction whatsoever. But this little Bigfoot knew where I was going, and without her guidance I would have never found that sequestered country road, where I'd found myself parked a few nights ago. When I arrived on the scene, I recognized the road at once, and the ominous woodgrove that had terrified the bejesus out of me. I knew I would never ever venture into those woods again. Luckily there had been no reports of an old lady found lying dead in the woods, so I marvelled over what those lights were that I had seen that night, that had been flashing an SOS signal, and why it was that I had found myself on a remote country road, with no memory of having driven there. I sat in the car with the Bigfoot by my side and waited. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I sensed that that was what I was meant to do. The blazing lights of my headlights lit up the dark road ahead of me. I gasped as I looked at the trees. Once again I saw the light flashes, 3 fast ones, 3 slow ones. I grimaced at the memory of my trip through those trees, the dreadful feeling of being watched, the eyes burning into the back of my neck, the menacing whistles I had heard. I recoiled at the memory, and my breathing quickened. The little Bigfoot looked troubled when she saw me almost hyperventilate. She squeezed my hand, reassuringly, and in a trice a sense of calm flooded over me. It was a cool night that reminded me that winter was on the precipice of being birthed, and soon no deciduous trees would carry the weight of their leaves on their sculptural boughs. A playful breeze was blowing some fallen leaves up in the air, like airborne golden confetti, while the soft moonlight, with its pearly prisms, seemed to shimmer over the road, complementing the lights of my car. All of a sudden I heard the sound of movement, as if something ponderously large was moving towards us. It sounded like heavy, thunderous feet, emerging through the lofty trees. That was when I saw a dark, shadowy silhouette, that at first looked like a large blob, For a moment the blob stopped, and then I saw a bright pair of yellow eyes, at about 8 feet off the ground, staring in our direction, and then the figure bounded hurriedly towards us, moving like the wind, and swinging a pair of overlong arms backwards and forwards. That was when I saw the bullet-shaped silhouette, the large shoulders getting closer and closer to me, and the creature looked as if it was floating as it moved, even though the sound of her feet was very powerful. I knew at once that this was the Bigfoot's mother. Instead of feeling fear, I felt an indescribable excitement. I had grown incredibly attached to the small female Bigfoot, and I knew meeting the mother would be an incredible privilege. If I'd seen that figure gallivanting towards me on the night I'd first discovered the little Bigfoot in the back of my truck, I don't mind admitting I'd have run for the hills with an impending sense of dread, believing my life was in perilous danger. But on this night, when a soft moonlight peppered the road, I was filled with a wondrous sense of awe. Then there she was, the large female Bigfoot, standing there, 3 feet away from my car, her yellow eyes focused earnestly on my truck. I opened the door for the little Bigfoot to get out. She climbed out of my truck hurriedly, running ebulliently towards her mother, and the interaction between mother and daughter, being reunited again, was remarkably human, as the female Bigfoot grabbed her baby and threw her up and down in her arms. She then put her Bigfoot child on the ground and examined her youngling's foot that was perfectly healed. The little Bigfoot was delighted to show her mother her foot, and began to demonstrate that she could walk on it properly and that it no longer hurt. I had climbed out of my car and was standing there in the road, watching this wonderful interaction, my eyes almost glistening with tears. I was so moved by the love of this devoted mother. Even though the light of my headlights were on, and my engine was still purring like a contented cat, I remained standing on the road, my hair being assaulted by the hands of an icy cool breeze, just locked up in the moment. The female Bigfoot stood out proud and tall, her imposing, almost regal presence made all the more detailed by the light of my headlights. I could see her clearly. Her humanness took me aback. I almost expected her to have primate qualities, but beyond her overlong arms, bullet-shaped head, and long flowing dark hair, she was uncannily human. Although the features of her face were more chiselled, with prominent cheekbones, a flat nose, and hooded eyes, but like her daughter, she was incredibly feminine. I observed her movements and hand gestures were almost ballerinig. She stood stoically still for a moment, studying me curiously. There was a thankful benevolence in her eyes, and then she spoke to me in a language that seemed to melt in my mind into English like the butter on a bagel. I knew exactly what she was saying. Kilata kilanokwa, hasa shikenasi, holoto basi, linatilakwa. Thank you for your help. When I saw you lancing the boils of the cows on that farm, I knew you could help me with my daughter's foot. You know, the funny thing is, I thought someone was watching me then. Kolota hilakakwa hopasilati lakilo nopo sinashakwasa alikolo. You shouldn't doubt your feelings. That's the problem with your kind. You always doubt your gut instincts, which is why you never progress. If you were more in tune with your senses, you'd be astonishingly sophisticated. But all your doubting is one of your kind's greatest stumbling blocks. When you entered the forest the other night, you were terrified. You knew you were being watched. You thought you were being pursued by a great evil. You were being watched by eyes that were wanting to ensure you could be trusted. They were my friends, who are far from evil. I'm sorry we gave you quite the scare. But when someone is looking into your mind, it is an intrusive feeling, and that's what they were doing, which is why you were so unsettled. Kosikansa akilono, sashikalakwasi, likatilonopo, kasakonolo. I admit, the one that called out to you in your sleep was me. I sent you here tonight to drop my daughter off. I fed her the directions to bring her back to me safely tonight. Thank you so much for treating her. I knew I could trust you, and that was affirmed to me by my friends. Thank you for not telling others of your kind about us. It is important for us to protect our privacy. You're probably wondering how I can speak to you in my own language, but you understand every word.
I admit, it does stump me a little bit, I told her.
Quilokota, sakilaswa, monopata, nikolosa. I can communicate like this. It's a telepathic exchange, you see. We can employ the communication we wish, but sometimes we choose not to.
I thought as much, I said.
Kilatilanoko, hasakasha, Zalia, tolopatilaki, akolosopa. I just want to thank you for taking care of Zalia. Thanks to you, her foot is healed, and I will be indebted to you for your great kindness.
It's a pleasure. I'm very happy to have helped.
Galakika, Zalia. Where are you going? Zalia asked her mother, as her daughter ran back to my truck to retrieve the green blanket, which she showed her mother, who looked up at me to affirm that her daughter could have the blanket.
It's hers, I said. She's welcome to it.
The female Bigfoot thanked me again, tossed her daughter with the blanket onto her shoulders and nodded. She began to whistle, and I heard all kinds of whistles being returned through the trees. And then, to my amazement, she was gone, and I found there were tears in my eyes. This had indeed been a magical experience for me. But when I returned home, I was greeted by a very indignant wife.
"Where have you been?" she asked me. "You've done it again, George. Disappeared in the middle of the night."
"If I told you, you wouldn't believe me," I told her.
"Try me," she said. "If you must know, I was meeting a very elegant woman with dark hair on a sequestered country road."
My wife rolled her eyes in the back of her head.
"You're telling me you're having an affair, George? Like I'd believe that in a month of Sundays. Oh, please, who would have you?" "Well, you asked me. I told you."
So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. I really enjoyed that, and I must say, how fabulous for this vet to treat a little baby Bigfoot. And the mother had actually seen this vet working on a steer or a cow and just absolutely realised that this is the man for the job. And somehow she managed to call out to him. And in his sleep, he managed to drive to a sequestered country road. Wow, what a story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.